తినడం కూడా ఓ పండగే. మొరాకో మరి మాకో? పూర్తి వివరాలకు చదవండి రేపటి సాక్షి దినపత్రిక.
Welcome to Sakshi TV special immigration talk show with attorney Ms. Prashanthi Reddy. Please note that Sakshi TV now has 5 immigration shows every week. On Mondays with Somi Reddy Garu, on Tuesdays with Kaveti Garu, on Wednesdays with Prashanthi Reddy in English, on Thursdays with Chand Parvatneni, and on Fridays with Banu Lindra. Please tune in to ask your questions. If you are an immigration attorney and would like to join our special shows, please email us at usa@sakshi.com or call us at 866-725-7441. If you begin the show, please note that the information provided on this show is not a legal advice and for general informational purposes only. Sakshi TV or its agents will not be responsible for the use of information. If you need any legal contact, you can definitely contact the attorney directly. Ms. Prashanthi Reddy needs no introduction. She is none other than the attorney and the lawyer from law offices of Prashanthi Reddy. They deal with a wealth of new and different varieties of visas, from H-1B to F-1, from investors to travel visas. So if you need consultations or if you need to find out more information, you can definitely log on to their firm, which is nothing but www.reddyesq.com. So without any further delay, let us welcome the founder herself, Ms. Prashanthi Reddy. Prashanthi Reddy Garu, welcome back, Andy. I hope you're doing well.
I am Shivani. Thank you for asking, and I hope you're doing well.
Yes. So Ms. Reddy, firstly, before we get on to the topic today, I kind of wanted to know more about your law firm. I was going through and then I just found out that you just don't deal singly about the H-1Bs also. You deal with multiple visas. So can you talk a little about your law firm?
Yeah, sure. Our offices are located in Midtown Manhattan, and I have almost 30 years of experience as an immigration attorney, and we deal with everything, right from H's to L's, TNs, E visas, EB1, extraordinary ability, family-based cases, I-130, 485. And I've done asylum law also in the past, but don't do it as much right now. But yeah, pretty much we deal with most immigration matters.
Yes. And I think with that, Ms. Reddy, we can dive into today's topic. But before that, do you want to cover any latest immigration updates?
I think there is, everybody is very interested to know what payroll, there's something called payroll in place, PIP, which is a new announcement that USCIS has made. And unfortunately, this payroll in place ended even before it started. So, I mean, it's put on hold rather. Payroll in place is really for US citizen spouses who cannot apply for green cards because they didn't enter legally. So they're, instead of removing them and separating them from their family members, they are saying that you can remain in the country and not only remain, but you can get advance parole, meaning you can travel and come back, and you can also get employment authorization. But the court put that on hold because they said that this is not something that can be done through an executive order, and USCIS is basically violating its authority on advance parole. So it's on hold right now, but that caused a lot of buzz for some time. In addition to that, there is some clarification on F-1 students as to when they should apply, how many classes they can take online. So this, I wouldn't say that it's a new law, but they're clarifying the law and they put out an update on that.
Yes.
So yeah, maybe we could do that next time, but
yes,
it's quite a lot. Yeah.
Definitely, Ms. Reddy. And I think for today's show, we kind of were going to talk about the consequences one can face, the penalties one can face if they do some mischief with the H-1Bs or the F-1 visas. So number one, before we get into the deeper consequences, what is the first thing that the USCIS or the US government is going to do if they find something wrong with your H-1Bs or the F-1 visas, or if you've committed some fraud?
So depending on what is wrong, right? If it is something that if your documentation is not complete, or if you made some mistake procedurally, or they're not convinced that you qualify, then they can just deny the case and there will not be any immigration consequences. But if there is some fraud or willful misrepresentation of a fact, then, and if that was done for the purposes of getting some immigration benefit, then definitely there will be consequences, and there are several different kinds of consequences, different depending on what the case actually is. But so there are two types of fraud. One is willful misrepresentation, and the other one is, basically fraud. They're pretty much the same. So fraud occurs when the person procures or tries to procure a benefit under the US immigration laws, and the alien, that person, a non-citizen, makes a false representation, right? And that false representation was made willfully, meaning that they didn't make it without realizing, but they made it willfully. And it was a material fact, meaning it was a willful misrepresentation or false representation of a material fact, something that is important, something that made them get their benefit, right? And that false representation was made to a US government official, right? So that false representation could be a statement, it could be a document, it could be orally during the time of a visa interview or an immigration interview, and you've made that false representation to a government official. So if you make a false representation, say to a vendor, say you're an IT consulting company and you make a false representation to a vendor about what the immigration status is of your employee, and you put a false H-1 or something like that, that's not necessarily immigration fraud, because you're not making it to a US government official.
Yes.
Now, they can sue you maybe on some other grounds, the vendor, but it's not an immigration fraud. So in addition to that, the false representation had to be made with the intent to deceive a US government official. And the US government official actually believed what you said and granted you a benefit. So you see, all these are the elements of fraud. If and we could get into the what happens, the consequences. Should we discuss that now?
Yes. I think before that, I want to kind of get into the detection process, Ms. Reddy. So how does that actually happen? How does the USCIS kind of, first understand the red flags that, people are calling right now? So what are some things that, USCIS can easily detect, something that people think that, it can slip under their nose? So can you, as an attorney, can you kind of say some of the examples that people usually kind of do?
Right. I can give you some examples, and that's the best way of answering that question, I think. If it is at the time of if you are going for a visa interview, say, at the consulate, and you say that you have a degree from XYZ college, right? USCIS will and can contact the school to find out whether you have a degree from that school. If your employer is saying that they have a job for that employee at a client site, again, US Department of State will contact the client. And it's very easy to contact the client, right? You're giving a client letter and you're giving the phone number and everything there, right? There for them to contact, email address. They will contact the client to see if there is an actual, there is work for that particular employee. And this has happened many, many, many times. And if the client will then respond to the USCIS saying, I'm sorry, we've never heard of that person, then that is misrepresentation and immigration fraud as well, right? So that is one way that they find out. In addition, if you're filing a H-1, and again, you put in the same information, you put in a client letter which is fake, say, and they call the client, and the client says that, they don't know who you are. Of course, there are instances in which they may say they don't know who you are, but it could be that the person that USCIS is talking to doesn't have information, so they just say that we don't know. And it could be that upon further investigation, you're able to prove that the letter was actually given by the client. In that instance, of course, there's no consequences, but in an instance where you've actually made up that letter, then it's very easy for USCIS to find out. Sometimes they do, as I said, do a good job of it, and sometimes they botch it up and they don't actually do proper investigation and they just make a hurried response, give a hurried result and just deny the case, and then we have to file an appeal, etc., to show that we're not wrong. But in the instances that where the clients are actually the people are wrong and they are committing immigration fraud, that's a big problem, and USCIS can easily find it out. Another instance is once the H-1B is approved, there's an organization called FDNS, which is contracted by USCIS, and we pay that extra fee, for that purposes, to fund FDNS. So they will come after the approval, they will, in maybe 1 in 10 cases, 1 in 15 cases, whatever the ratio may be, they will go to the client physically and find out if that person is actually working there. They will go to, if the work location is the beneficiary's home, they will go to the beneficiary's home and find out if they're actually working there or not. And then they will write a report, then which they'll send to USCIS, and then USCIS will either deny the case or they will finding a fraud, or they might even start criminal investigation. So there are many ways that USCIS can find out. The other way is the Labor Department. This is not USCIS. It could be ICE, which is the enforcement wing of USCIS. This usually in the case of students, if they find students working in gas stations, etc., the ICE will be involved, and they will then, start removal proceedings against those students who have worked unlawfully without a work permit, without the authority to work. So there are many ways in which to find out.
Also, Ms. Reddy, my question was, does this happen even internationally? Because, internationally, I meant to say that, let's say I wanted to go to USA and I'm in the office and I said I studied so-and-so degree from India. So do you think the US government can also cross-check that? Because a lot of people say that I've got degrees from here and there and here and there, and sometimes it might not be true. So what's the situation with that?
So if, remember the elements of what is misrepresentation and what is immigration fraud. If the degree was material to the approval of the H-1B, say, for example, say the person has a bachelor's degree in computer science, a master's degree in computer science, a PhD in computer science, but maybe the master's degree is fake. The bachelor's degree is not. It's a 4-year degree based on which they got the H-1. Now, if somehow they find out, because they just put additional documents, and if they find out that the other degree, which is not material to the case getting approved, is false, then it may not be immigration fraud because it's not a material fact. So it depends on a case-by-case situation on, that particular case, whether it is fraud or it isn't.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, yes, USCIS can easily find out whether a degree is fraudulent or not. All they have to do is call the university or correspond with them, and the university will then, they have records, right, of all the students that studied in their university. So it's not that difficult to find out if they really want to.
Yeah. And also, Ms. Reddy, I kind of wanted to understand what is this body shopping practices that people do under the H-1B visas, and what are some consequences that, Indian tech workers, maximum people traveling from India to USA are from the tech background and they're somebody from the IT industry. So what kind of consequences can they face immediately?
Well, when you say body shopping, really now nobody knows anymore what that term means. It's a very loosely used term, but if you are a company and you say are getting people to the US on a H-1 to work as a software developer, but none of those people are actually working as a software developer. They're all working at a gas station, and you pay them to minimum wage or whatever to work at that gas station, or even if you pay them the prevailing wage, but they're not actually working as a software engineer, then that is immigration fraud, because
Yeah.
they're not, and that is done willfully. Number one, remember our elements of what is a fraud. That is being done with the purpose of misrepresenting to a US government official by saying that they're going to be working for software as a software company for Cognizant, say, or for whatever, Bank of America, and they're not actually doing that. So you're doing that for the purposes of getting them the H-1. And when they come here, then they're working somewhere else. So that is fraud. And there are, many consequences to it, depending
Yes.
on whether you are an individual or whether you are a company.
Yes. And these kind of unauthorized employments were also, they also came into limelight, especially just 2 months ago, where 4 techies from the Telugu states, they were kind of, hiring 20 to 30 people, and they were making sure that all of them are living in one basement. And they were kind of, doing all these, frauds happening. So what will happen to these? And luckily or unluckily, all of these people were saved. But again, everybody were deported ASAP, Ms. Reddy. So you tell us, what consequences can students face if they are under an unauthorized employee?
Well, first of all, there's no employees that are unauthorized, right? Any company can, if they have a valid job offer for a person, can hire a person. Again, there is also no restriction from providing housing for your employees who are students, maybe, and on OPT, and providing housing for them and providing them with training, right? So we have to understand. Sometimes the media portrays things that are legitimately done as not being legitimate, right? For example, I can give you this very well-known case in Texas where um, girls were, there were a bunch of girls all were living in the same house because the employer was providing them housing and providing them with training as well, so that they can find jobs. And I think I don't really know what status, they were all in status, either F-1s or H-1s. So there's nothing preventing them from doing that. And there was some person who came into the house to inspect or fumigate the house or something because they had a pest issue, so pest control people. And then that person saw everybody, all these girls living together, and he just presumed that it's, nefarious activities are taking place, and that it's human trafficking, and that it's a brothel, and that, 100 other things, presumptions, all these are, right? And he calls immigration, I don't know who he calls, but everyone gets involved. And, nothing of that kind is taking place. So a lot of times they tend to sensationalize these things. It's not like anyone was being, a person, it's not like there was any violation or there was any trafficking or smuggling or anything like that, right? So we have to distinguish between the two. But there are instances in which there are some procedural violations, right? So if you are on a H-1 and you don't have a job and you're not being paid, right? And you're being given housing, but you're not being paid, that is a violation. So that's a LCA violation, that's a Department of Labor violation. You have to be paid if you're working for someone. So that's, there's a possibility of all kinds of violations there. So it's really a case by case basis, and sometimes people get unlucky. And USCIS tries to make an example of some companies so that to deter the other companies from behaving in the same way or just to scare them. So really, we can't say that, everybody is, doing this, or just because they're in a house together, there's some issue. So it depends on a case by case basis what is going on. There's some really bad things happening, and instances where, employees are not being paid, and a lot of violations are taking place. And in some other instances, there may be some procedural violations, but given how difficult it is to follow USCIS regulations, I think every single company that is filing H1s will be in some way will not be 100% safe with reference to following all the rules. And
Of
they will,
course.
so something to keep in mind.
I really like the last statement. I think nobody would actually be.
It's
But I guess,
impossible to be, I mean, I think. So it really, and see, the problem is USCIS most of the time looks the other way. And they only come sometimes and decide, not to look the other way. So even USCIS is not consistent in its what it finds as something that is not acceptable and what is acceptable, right? So they keep changing the interpretation of it as well. So it's very difficult for employers to keep all that in mind and
yeah.
follow the law to uh, you know as it should be. I'm not saying that they shouldn't, but I'm just saying it's difficult.
Yes. And now, Ms. Reddy, I kind of wanted to talk about not just the H-1B frauds or the F-1 frauds that people do during the process or after the process, but again, there are things, consequences that people do kind of. I mean, it's not uncommon and it's not something that people don't know about. But a lot of students do travel here, and then they really go work at workstations and they really go, work basically any job. I know so many people doing it. So they've kind of glamorized that, okay, when you go to USA, you have a settled life there all of a sudden. But that is some kind of portrayal in the Indian society where they're actually going and crossing a lot of limits. And, they are kind of, in that corner. So, Ms. Reddy, can you tell the specific? I want you to answer this question and especially talk to the students who are watching the show to tell about the consequences that they can face if they are caught. I'm not saying everybody's going to get caught, but if they are caught, what are some serious consequences that they can face?
To say it in one sentence, they can be removed from the country. So more often than you see, actually, it's not as rare as we think it is. A lot of students fall into this category where they come from, poorer families. They take loans, their parents take loan for their, studies. They pay the entire tuition fee for school, and they start school, and obviously they need a way to, living expenses. So I've seen people working as babysitters. I've seen people working in gas stations to make ends meet. And this is not allowed really by immigration. So you have to be aware of what, and just because your friend is doing it doesn't mean that you can do it. Your friend may not get caught, but you will get caught. So, it doesn't mean that because five other people that did it and they didn't get caught, that you don't have the chance of getting caught, right? So I've seen that it's more and more prevalent that students are getting into trouble. Just giving you an example, one of many examples, and these are all real life examples. A student traveled back to India for vacation and was coming back in the middle of her semester. They just randomly checked her phone, social media, laptop, and they found some information showing that she was working somewhere. And they simply didn't even say anything. They were outright rude, made her sign a statement, and just sent her back. And so now she cannot complete her semester. She will not get a refund from the school. She's stuck because she hasn't completed her master's. Parents have spent a tremendous amount of money getting her to the US. That's a non-refundable tuition fee. She'd have to go back and start her, most probably her education all over again. So that's a big setback for anybody, and a person so young, especially in the beginning of their career. So think twice before you do something that you're not allowed to do simply because your friend tells you to do it. And students get into trouble not only with immigration violations but also not following the law. Driving without a driver's license. You don't know how often that happens. Driving because, they thought it was okay, nothing will happen to them, right? Because when they're young, they think they're invincible and nothing can happen. We all think that way, right, when we're young. Then we see more of life and we realize the bad things that can happen, right? So, shoplifting also happens a lot. They think that, okay, just, a small piece of something that I'm picking up worth only $10. It's not a big deal. It's not a real crime. It is. It could be a misdemeanor, it could be a felony, depending on what the worth of that particular thing is. You can not only go to jail, but after you go to jail, you'll be removed from the country. So, yeah, there are a lot of consequences to not following the laws.
And let's say, Ms. Reddy, that they've come to, let's say they did not go to an extent of deportation, and there were maybe some consequences that they had to face, very minute. But then, do you think that's going to affect their green card process, or maybe they want to be the citizen, and how is that going to affect the later on process?
Yeah, so I think that's a good segue, and we have a little bit time. So let's discuss about the consequences, right, of immigration fraud. So the first consequence is inadmissibility. That means it renders an individual inadmissible to the US, meaning you cannot remain in the US, you cannot come to the US, right? So you'll be promptly removed from the US. That's what inadmissibility, based on the inadmissibility. And also because you're removed, once you have a removal order against you, you will not be allowed to file for a green card either. You will not be able to get another visa, come back on a different visa, because you will be inadmissible and you'll be barred from coming into the US. It could be a 10-year bar, it could be a 5-year bar, whatever it is. There will be a bar if you are found that you've committed some fraud. If you're at a visa, your visa could be denied for fraud or misrepresentation. And if this happens, then again, they can put a 10-year bar on you. So you will not be able to forget about applying for a visa. Even if you have an existing visa, you cannot come into the country.